I've been making and collecting Korean natural farming inputs for over 5 years now, and something that I wondered when I was first starting to see the jars stacking up was, what can I do with all of these? Because when most people hear that there are not 1, not 3, not 5, not 7, but 9 core inputs that go into the Korean natural farming framework, it is easy to get overwhelmed. But it's also easy to put off trying them out. And the thing is, when you have all of the inputs on hand, you begin to realize the flexibility and the versatility that each input carries. And you start to understand the way that they function within your garden. So in this video, I'm going to attempt to walk us through all of the main ways that these inputs can and should be used, so that if you do have them already, you know what you actually have, and so that if you're putting off making some of them, you might be encouraged to do so. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Taylor. I help home gardeners turn their backyards into sustainable and regenerative growing spaces. And Korean natural farming, KNF, is one of those things that is both brimming with potential and is also picking up momentum amongst home gardeners, especially home gardeners who want to grow more naturally. And if that's you and you want to learn more about making and using these inputs, you can check out my free gardening community on School. It'll be linked in the description, or you can scan the code on the screen as always. Get access to a treasure trove of free resources, and more importantly, a supportive community who is doing the same stuff that you are. In this video, I'm going to walk through each of the 9 core inputs in the same order that I list them in my book, A Home Gardener's Guide to Korean Natural Farming. I'll give a very brief description of what the input is, how it's made, and then we'll focus a bit more on the how to use it side of things in this video. So starting with indigenous microorganisms, IMO. IMO is the main event within KNF. It's really the main claim to fame, I'd say. The idea is that we're getting the best and brightest microorganisms, especially the fungi, from the best growing natural environments in our area. And by area, I mean the general region that surrounds where you live. And the way that we do this is by capturing microbes, by culturing them onto a grain medium that's placed in the forest inside of a container. We take this home, and then we preserve it in sugar. We grow it out on a new substrate, usually a bran, wheat or rice or oats, and then we take it one step further in its cultivation. We let it integrate itself with the soil native to your garden or field. And if this is a brand new concept to you, that was way too speedy of an explanation to really make sense, so go check out our other videos if you actually want to learn how to make it. The reason behind making this soil inoculant is that when we can get the biology that has adapted and shaped itself according to the natural growing environment in which we're trying to grow our garden, we're adding microbial diversity, strength, adaptability, and longevity to our growing space. The main way that we use IMO, here we have IMO 4, which means that it's gone through all of those stages that I just talked through, of collecting, preserving, diversifying, and integrating. The main way that we use this is as a simple top dressing for our garden beds. We sprinkle it across the top of the soil, very lightly, it's just a dusting almost, and then we mulch over the top of it with something like straw or wood chips or leaves, depending on the setting. And then we want to water in our maintenance solution, which we'll get into a little bit later on, over the top to sort of reactivate or awaken the biology. And it's going to start finding its way into the garden soil. Microbes are critical to garden health for so many reasons. But one of the incredible pieces of potential that IMO4 has for your garden is that if we can get these fungal cultures well established in the garden, the nutrient cycling that happens in the soil starts happening really effectively. And nutrient cycling refers to the whole process of converting organic compounds and minerals in the soil into bioavailable nutrients for plants to use to build their bodies. This is what happens in nature all the time. There's absolutely nothing being wasted because microbes are stewarding the nutrients and converting them and transferring them from the plants to animals, to the soil, to plants, and so on. So if we can get that microbial energy a-poppin' in our gardens, we're gonna need less and less input over time to sustain our gardens. What an incredible world that would be if everyone's garden was self-sustaining. I'm gonna keep things moving onto fermented plant juice, but we'll return to IMO again as we look at the multi-uses for each input. For now, we're just gonna look at their primary use. Fermented plant juice is a syrupy solution that contains growth hormones, enzymes, minerals, and microbes from the healthiest and most robust plants, sometimes weeds from your yard, sometimes intentionally grown plants. This is made by picking said plants, chopping them up, mixing them with sugar by equal parts by weight, and letting the moisture get drawn out along with the beneficial compounds that I just mentioned. This takes a week to make. You strain out the solids, and keep the liquid, and you've got yourself a great plant spray ingredient that you can apply to plants, diluted 1 to 500 in water. And the main thing that you need to know about FPJ is that it is only meant to be used while plants are in their early growth stages. Once the plant starts forming buds, putting on flowers and fruiting, it stops needing those specific growth hormones and minerals, and it starts needing other things instead, which we'll get into in a moment. Before we do, we're going to touch on lactic acid bacteria, LAB. LAB is also applied at a dilution rate of 1 to 500, and it's made by fermenting starchy water using a culture and using that to curdle animal milk, which from there can be strained of its curds, and the remaining whey is your lactic acid bacteria serum. Now, LAB is a great all-purpose defense plant spray, also aids in decomposition within the soil. It's one of the most common groups of bacteria and is found in fermented foods, in your soil, on your skin, it's everywhere. But the serum is great for applying to plants to keep pathogens and disease from developing on plant foliage and fruit. Speaking of fruit, I mentioned a moment ago that when your plants start forming their flower buds and producing fruit, their nutritional and hormonal needs shift. And instead of rapidly lengthening their foliar growth, what they really need is calcium. And so that's what we can give them when we apply water-soluble calcium phosphate and calcium acetate. These two inputs are made from animal bones and eggshells, respectively, and the way that we get the desired minerals from the ingredients is through a 2-week-long vinegar soak. And this is just a simple extraction process, leaves us with a good source of calcium in 2 slightly distinct forms. I often refer to them together because they are so similar, but technically WCP is applied first as flower buds are forming, and then flowers start to open up, and WCA is brought in to really help incorporate calcium into the plant's diet. These are both applied 1 to 500, diluted 1 to 500. Now we have a few more inputs that provide nutrients, but the next one that we're gonna look at is actually gonna bring us back to the immune support category alongside LAB, and that is our slightly challenging to make and controversially named input, Oriental Herbal Nutrient, or OHN. And I know that Oriental is not a favorable term. I know that it can be offensive to people of Asian descent, but it's tricky for me to know exactly what to do about that because these terms were invented and used by South Korean farmers, most notably Han Kyu-cho. I don't mean to offend anyone by using the term, nor do I want to further confuse people who are already familiar with these inputs. So I'm going to continue to call it OHN until I'm convinced of a better alternative. I'm open. OHN is a combination of 5 different herbal extracts performed over the course of several months. Angelica root, licorice root, cinnamon bark, ginger, and garlic, to be specific, are soaked in an alcohol spirit and extracted every 2 weeks 5 times. When you combine these tinctures, you get OHN. And OHN does a number of things for plants. It provides phytonutrients at a small dose, but it also enters the plant cell walls in a more direct way due to the alcohol content of the solution. The beneficial compounds found in each of the 5 herbs mentioned are particularly beneficial for establishing and strengthening immune defense. So these are sort of applied regularly as a plant medicine alongside the other inputs in your maintenance spray. And because OHN is so strong and it gets stronger as it ages, the dilution rates are a little different. Freshly made OHN is diluted 1 to 1,000 in water. OHN that's over a year old is diluted 1 to 1,500, and OHN that's over 2 years old is diluted 1 to 2,000. Going back to the nutritional side of things, a similar input to FPJ that we make in Korean natural farming is fermented fish amino acids. Now it doesn't contain the same components as FPJ, but the process of making it is similar in that fish scraps, in place of plant material, are chopped up and mixed with sugar and left to ferment and draw out beneficial compounds, in this case over the course of an entire year. And also in this case, the compounds that get drawn out are a wide spectrum of beneficial amino acids. This is a great addition to the early growth stages of plant development. Fish fertilizer has long been seen as a powerhouse fertility engine, and FAA is a very slow-paced, gentle extraction process that leads to a well-preserved set of essential minerals and amino acids that are great for giving your plants a growth kickstart. This step is quite powerful, so we always dilute it 1 to 1,000. To round out our immune support side of the spectrum, for our 8th slot, we have vinegar, preferably a raw fruit or vegetable vinegar, not white vinegar or fancy balsamic. Brown rice vinegar is the traditional choice, so you might see it other places abbreviated as BRV, but I tend to use apple cider or peach vinegar or other homemade vinegars that I make from my FPJ residues. Vinegar is a cleansing agent for your plant that helps get rid of disease, but also helps plants by stimulating a mild plant defense response that helps them defend themselves from subsequent pest attacks. Fruit can develop a slightly waxy coating on their exterior. when vinegar is applied, and those coatings are so that pests have a harder time penetrating the fruit skin. So vinegar goes into our weekly maintenance spray diluted 1 to 500. And finally, we have diluted seawater. Now, salt water can be used as a substitute for seawater, although you'll miss out on the beneficial biology from the sea, obviously. That said, if that's what you got, like us, use it. The trace minerals in the salt are really great for feeding soil biology and helping you to remineralize your soil. Always dilute seawater or salt water 1 to 30 before applying, and take it easy so you don't dehydrate your soil microbes. This is perfectly safe to use so long as you're diluting it. Seawater has been used forever in traditional agriculture. The way that salt can harm your soils when it's applied in large amounts. Don't salt your fields, always dilute. Salt water is made by adding 1 part salt to 30 parts water by weight, and then dilute that again 1 to 30 in water. Now that we've covered the inputs, how they're made and how they're used at their kind of core level, now we get to go through some of the additional uses for these. And these uses are mostly all related to various components of the garden, different functions that we want to facilitate or inputs that we want to make. But one area that some of these inputs can be used outside the garden is as a natural cleaner. Specifically, vinegar and lactic acid bacteria are great all-purpose cleaners for countertops, windows, gardening tools, IMO collection boxes, whatever you've got. If you don't mind the slightly cheesy scent left behind, both vinegar and LAB are great cleaning products. Dilute them, of course, so that they go further, but you can use these to clean your house as well as your skin and your hair. These both contain live cultures, so long as your vinegar is unpasteurized. So they're a probiotic for your skin, and many people use them as such. While we're here, it's worth mentioning that while I can't recommend them at all from a medical perspective, I have no authority here to say this, nor do I want you to take this as medical advice or advice at all, really. Just really want to cover my bases there. What I will point out is that many KNF practitioners teach that you can consume most of the KNF inputs. To my knowledge, the only ones that they discourage consuming are IMO and seawater. But technically, when made properly, and if they're not growing any weird mold or looking funky or smelling weird or whatever else, all of the other 7 inputs are things that you can drink. As always, heavily diluted. OHN is probably the least controversial one here, since it's essentially a homemade medicinal tincture similar to what you might already have on hand. All that said, I wanted to mention it since I know that is something that KNF folks like to do. If you do want to try these out, please do so responsibly, and so on and so forth. I don't personally consume these products, but this does bring us to someone in my life who I do give these to, and that would be my chickens. Chickens, and really livestock in general, were actually the original benefactors of the KNF inputs, since Master Cho was a chicken farmer and was always looking for ways to keep odors down in his chicken houses. Within the topic of livestock, though, there are 3 main areas that I can use these inputs: my bedding, the feed, and the water. For the livestock bedding, all of these inputs, without exception, are additions that I make every once in a while to my livestock bedding. Any of them on their own can help aid in smell reduction, but especially IMO4 and LAB. These also help bedding material break down and decompose a bit faster, so if you're using to your chickens to their fullest potential, as I hope you are, you can add these inputs to their bedding. I usually just spray down the bedding each time that I do my weekly maintenance solution spray, and then I try to water it in so that it gets into the bedding materials a bit more thoroughly. We use our chicken bedding as our primary compost making mechanism, and getting the inputs into the mix adds all of the benefits little by little of each of the inputs into our compost, which we'll eventually make. We'll come back to compost actually in a minute, but while we're on livestock, another major use for these inputs is in the livestock water. All of the liquid inputs can be added to your livestock water and drunk by your hens or your pigs or cattle or whatever, and they'll all help the animals in the same sort of way, or at least similar ways that they help your plants. The vinegar, OHN, and LAB help our chickens sustain healthy immune systems. The FPJ, FAA, and water-soluble calcium phosphate and acetate help our chickens by supplying trace minerals and giving them an all-around healthy supplement to their feed. Speaking of their feed, all of these inputs plus IMO4 can be added to their chicken feed to ferment it. Now, if you don't know about fermented chicken feed, I'd highly recommend checking it out. Fermenting your chicken feed makes it more easily digestible, gives them probiotics, it makes nutrients in the grain more bioavailable. Add equal parts water and feed together and mix in whatever inputs you want. Make sure that you add LAB or IMO to kickstart the microbial activity, the fermentation, and then wait 24 hours to let it ferment. And you can keep fermenting it up to 3 days, and then beyond that, it might start to get a little funky, and your chickens won't want it. This is actually also a great way to save a little bit extra on feed, because if you're using crumbles or pellets, all of that feed dust residue gets soaked up into the water and ferments, and you don't lose it. You only need a tiny bit of IMO4 depending on how much feed you're fermenting. Right now I'm doing this for our baby, now teenage hens, to finish off their starter feed, but you can do it with any type of feed, whole seeds, pellets, crumble. Going back to compost, again, all of these inputs can be added to compost piles to help speed up decomposition, but also just to saturate and sort of supercharge your compost in general. I like to add these to a pile as I'm building it. As I'm wetting down the materials, you can mix them 5-gallon buckets of the diluted inputs and then just pour them over the materials as you stack them up. But another area that I use these inputs is in a compost adjacent arena, which is Bokashi. And Bokashi, if you're unaware, is the process of fermenting your food scraps or crop residue, weeds, lawn clippings, and preserving them so that you can then compost them. And this allows you to safely compost animal products like meat, fat, dairy, eggs, cooked food. Lactic acid bacteria on its own can be used to ferment your food scraps in a bucket, but if you're making Bokashi bran, I like to add fermented plant juice, salt water, and fermented fish amino acids. Again, for a similar reason I added to my compost pile in the first place. It's just another way of getting those nutrients and microbes into the equation and resulting in next level soil building, because that is what this is all about. Now, speaking of which, soil preparation. All of these inputs, in addition to being added to compost, can be added directly to the soil in preparation for the growing season and as a way to replenish the soil after the growing season. IMO is, of course, going to be the most effective input in your arsenal, but diluted seawater is a great mineralizing component as well as a way to get some extra biology, again, if you have access to the sea. So at the beginning and at the end of your growing season, these go on the ground. They activate your IMO4 with your other inputs as well by just lightly spraying, and always mulch over the top of IMO4 so the sun doesn't bake it. Now, during the growing season, while plants are in the ground, you can still top dress the soil with IMO4, but it can also be used in a slightly different way. And this brings us to the maintenance spray. I do this once or twice a week, and this is just an overall plant foliage application. You're taking your inputs and you're committing to actually spraying them on the plants in your garden. I like putting it on the calendar, a specific day when I will apply the solution, helps me remember. So for the early plant growth stages, your FPJ and FAA, and the later fruit forming parts of the season, your WCP and WCA, all the while keeping your OHN, your LAB, and your vinegar in the cycle throughout the season. Follow the dilution rate protocols for each of these and you will be good to go. Now, if you've got a bubbler and you want to add IMO4 to the mix, you can make an aerated IMO compost tea, similar to how you'd make one with compost, just a small handful of IMO4 in the bucket with the maintenance spray inputs that correlate to your growth stages. And now you're getting IMO biology in there as well. The maintenance solution can also be used as a seed soak solution and a bare root soak before planting. You only soak your seeds for 10 to 15 minutes for the really small ones, 30 to 60 minutes for the medium-sized seeds, and you can go a bit longer for supersized seeds before planting them. And this soak just stimulates and awakens the seed's metabolism. We use this solution to hydrate our homemade potting mix, and we get really good germination rates from our seeds. And that is going to wrap it up for this video. If I missed something, or if you'd like to hear more on a particular topic, let me know in the comments. If you're looking at your backyard lawn and wishing that you could use it to grow food or have an aesthetic paradise instead, I would love to hop on a call with you and see if the natural gardening reboot would be a good fit for you. I can walk you through the entire process, start to finish, of building your garden the right way using many of these techniques and principles outlined in this video. If you liked this video and you want to get a bit more context for what Korean natural farming is actually all about, you want to check out this video next. And thank you as always for watching. We'll see you in the next one.